Hi, my name is Danny Marsden. I'm a junior here at Hampden City College, and I want to talk to you a little bit about combining UUHawk, and I'll get into exactly what that means later, and machine learning. In particular, this is a community-based remote sensing project in southwestern Alaska, specifically in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. So the village that we're working out of is Quinnock, Alaska. It has a population of about 700. It's a predominantly Yupik Alaskan Native community. It is, like I said, the lower Plaquet Delta, and most importantly, it's facing climate change in a way that few communities are today. It really is the front line of climate change. So, what are we doing? We're helping to understand and record the heritage landscape. Particularly, that means that we're doing interviews, we're mapping areas, we are looking at subsistence generally. Primarily, this is being done by a research team primarily led by Dr. Sean Gleason here at Hampden City College, as well as Jonathan Lim over at Oxford, myself. So we're looking at this heritage landscape. In particular, we're looking at archaeological sites and subsistence sites. So sites like hunting camps, fishing camps, berry picking patches, these kinds of locations that are essential to UUHawk for subsistence. Now, UUHawk is a loop term, or it's a word used by the Yupik people, which roughly translates to subsistence, but it means more than that. It also means regarding the essential personhood of animals and the essential personhood of animals, as well as other kind of practices. For instance, keeping the Yupik language alive, the Yupik language, as well as practicing subsistence as you think of it. So picking berries, fishing, hunting. These kinds of actions are not only important culturally, but it's also important just to survival. It's the best way to live. And the Yupik language is approximately 18,000 speakers. So what we do in conjunction with that is essentially interviews and mapping projects. So we will conduct interviews about UUHawk, about subsistence, but we'll also digitize these maps. We digitized over 200 maps, and what we do is they come from sources like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Chalista, which is the larger native corporation, USGS, private contractors, and particularly ANCSA, which is a very important piece of legislation for Alaskan Natives, in the 1970s, parceling of land into individual plots. But really, this collection of data spans the entire 20th century and gives us a good overview of what the landscape, the heritage landscape, has looked like for the past 100 years. And this kind of brings me down to my point. We're integrating and bringing together indigenous knowledge systems and machine learning. Now, you might think that these two are incommensurate. They just wouldn't work together. However, that's not true. In fact, they're integral to each other right now in this area. So, in particular, in terms of machine learning, we work with SVMs, which is a classified machine learning type of algorithm. Essentially, it's similar to those am I a robot tests. Just in the same way that you click on them when you're signing into something online, and it would come up with a box of stop signs or bicycles, and you'd have to pick them out. You're creating a data set for pattern recognition, which will later be used by autonomous vehicles, for instance. We're doing a very similar kind of thing. However, we're using it on the landscapes. In particular, we're looking at vegetation and how that connects with UUHawk or subsistence. So we'll take we're collecting classified sites into a training data set. So these classified sites are sites that we already know the significance of. Might be an archaeological site that we already have information for, it might be a subsistence site we've learned about, but we already know what it is. With the eventual goal of classifying other sites, we want the machine learning algorithm to figure out where these other sites are based off of the training data set that we're building. So about the area in particular, Quinault, right there, is situated between three primary rivers. The Oyak River up north, the Connecticut River right next to the village, and the Acknowledgement River to the south. All between these three rivers, there exists subsistence sites where people traditionally use resources in subsistence. So these have bearing not only on fishing, hunting, and whatnot, but also with archaeological finds and other kind of historically notable places. So we looked at 10 primary sites up and down the coastline, which, as you can see, they span the entire area there because, in full honesty, the entire area is required for for subsistence. So we're kind of establishing this training data. There are a couple ways that we do this to find these classified sites. First and foremost, we look at archaeological sites, which we already know that they've already been excavated. There are multiple in the area. There's been a lot of really good archaeological work done near Quinn. There's a good relationship there as well. And in addition to that, we work with our local UP collaborators who are able to explain just integral parts of UP to us for an individual site or broadly. And so we can use that to identify these sites that are part and parcel to UP. Additionally, we use historic maps. And right here is an example. So this was originally a paper map, which we found in the land manager's office. It listed a whole bunch of subsistence-related activities on it. It's a map from about 2004, which doesn't seem that long ago, but the landscape changes so fast up there that it's important to have that kind of recent data as well. But what we've done essentially is we took a high-resolution image of it, just like a picture, and then brought that into ArcGIS, and we did what's called georeferencing, where we essentially take the map as an image and then put coordinates into that map in such a way that it accurately represents the data listed on the map in ArcGIS in a way that's intelligible by our machine learning algorithms. And so, as you can see on this map, we have listed berry patches, fish cams, these other kinds of UNIVOC subsistence important sites. So I just want to point you towards four of the many sites that we visit. Up here at the top right, we have a grave on the Acknowledgement River. And you might think, how's a grave important? It's a grave. It doesn't really make much sense to include that in with subsistence. But again, this is where UP collaborators come into play. So it's a common part of UP culture, or at least it was, that you were buried where you died. And so if you died at a fish camp, for example, you'd be buried at the fish camp, or if you died on the way back to the village, you'd be buried there. And so we can use these kind of graves as markers of either subsistence areas themselves, areas that are important to UNIVOC, or important paths between them. And so it's integral to our research that we have these kinds of data points. And we obviously would not have those without our local collaborators. Up here in the top left, I have Tumbuk, which is a fish processing site. It's an historic site from about 1900 or so. Just think about it this way. You catch 100 salmon a week, let's say. You can't eat all that salmon in 1 week, and you need to preserve it throughout the winter and throughout for the time to come. And so you need to preserve it. And to do that, you need to prepare it. There are two ways to preserve salmon up there, fermentation or drying, but both of which require extensive preparation and processing of that fish. And so, as you can see up here, we have these little divots, these little holes. Essentially, dig holes into the ground and use those to either to hold the salmon just as kind of a retainer, or as hermetically sealed things to ferment the salmon. And so that has significant impact on the vegetation and the landscape around it. Again, it's the physical markers, the heritage landscape, which shows this kind of important aspect of subsistence. And down here on the bottom right, we have Nunashuk, which is a very important archaeological site, not just for Quinault, not just for UP, but really for circumpolar history as a whole. It's an historic village, or prehistoric village, from about 1500 AD. It's the largest collection of pre-Columbian wood ever found in the world, in the New World, rather. And while large parts of it have been excavated, there are parts we still haven't. And so we were able to use those as markers where we could see the multispectral signatures of that and how that compares to other land around it and why it's different, because it clearly is. And then the last one I have over here is Leokumuk, which was a historic village on the Oyuk River, about 4 sod houses. This was determined through archaeological test fitting, basically minimally invasive archaeological methods. Up here, let's talk a little bit more about vegetative analysis. So what we'll do is we'll show up to a site and we'll essentially send up a drone. The drone will fly grids around and take multiple, just let's say every 5 seconds, it would take a picture of the ground below it. Now, it would do this with a regular RGB camera, but it would also do this with what's called a multispectral camera, which detects the wavelengths of light which are not visible with the human eye. And it takes all of that data, and afterwards, we bring it back and compile it into what's called an orthomosaic map, which is essentially we take all of those images and we stitch them together into a single map, similar to what we were doing with the historic maps. We georeference that into our GIS and give it those coordinates in a way that can be analyzed and used by the SVMs, by the machine. And this kind of vegetative analysis can tell us a lot of things. It can tell us like the robustness of the plant, its vigor, its species perhaps. We're still working on that, but it can tell us a lot about the plant themselves and what they look like. Now, the way that actually works is we set up these boundaries. When we're at an actual site, let's say it's an archaeological site, we would we walk around with a differential GPS and mark out the feature. And this can be determined through a variety of ways. If it's a subsistence plot, it might be through an interview. If it's an archaeological site, it might be test fitting, but we determine the boundaries of that site. From there, we're able to take the multispectral data of the same site, which has been georeferenced, so we know where it is, and we can compare. As you can see, this kind of boundary right here is similar to that one, which is similar to that one. Now, the difference between these two columns, they're both using the multispectral data. NDVI is a vegetative index, which is particularly used. We've been using in particular, but we also use RGB, just regular red green. Just color. So you can kind of see how it's applied to archaeological sites, but it's also applied to subsistence sites. And so we can walk around a berry patch, salmon berry patch, and mark it out, and then we can send the drone up, and it will get the multispectral signature of that patch. We can use that to, again, further add to this training data set, which will help hone those algorithms to better find these things and to monitor them autonomously. So again, with further research, we're looking at honing these SVMs, this machine learning, through creating larger data sets, training data sets. Additionally, we're developing these new indices as opposed to just NDVI or just RGB. And we're trying to apply this to the larger heritage landscape and to the larger, wider area as well. But most importantly, we're using UYAPOC, subsistence, as kind of the age-old ways of knowing, I think is a more direct translation. We're using those in conjunction with this machine learning to give the people of Quinault the resources they need to autonomously and more accurately monitor their environment and their own subsistence plots that are essential to UYAPOC in the face of climate change. And really that is the most important thing. So just here at the end, I want to give some Clayana thanks or acknowledgements. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank Connecticut Incorporated, as well as Connecticut Heritage Incorporated, as well as Willard Church, Warren Jones, Mita Hill, a whole myriad of others, as well as Sean Gleason, as well as Jonathan Lim, and